Patchwork Heart Ministry and Fiat Ministry Network invite you to discover your mission, a brand new in-depth monthly video series featuring engaging Catholic speakers who will challenge you to live your life abundantly. For only $25 a month, you will receive a personal monthly mission, including 3 full-length inspirational talks that build upon a new theme each month. Sign up for the Discover Your Mission tier at patreon.com/Patchwork Heart Ministry today.
The St. Raymond Nonnatus Foundation, in partnership with Patchwork Heart Ministry and Fiat Ministry Network, present a podcast for divorced and separated Catholics.
Welcome to a podcast from the St. Raymond Nonnatus Foundation for Freedom, Family, and Faith. My name is Ann DeSantis. Great to be here. This is an amazing series for After Divorce with Rose Sweet. And I believe we're on episode 9 already, which is Getting Through Grief. So Rose, welcome. Thanks so much for joining us again.
I love being here with you. It's good work that we're doing. So let's dive in.
Yeah, let's dive right in. So we're going to talk about grief. And I know that you yourself understand that. You've talked about it a lot. And there's so much to unpack during this 1 hour that we're together.
I'll never forget after divorce, well, you know what? It wasn't even after divorce. It was after divorce. I'd gone through grief supposedly, and I started dating again. And a guy that I really liked and had my hopes up again dumped me in a pretty painful way. I tailspun into grief that seemed deeper than after my divorce. And looking back, I realized what it was. In a difficult marriage, we're already grieving. We're already seeing the end probably coming. And we're in a grieving state. When it hits, we go through the full grief process. But when you get up on your feet and you have this lightness and you have renewed hope, and then you crash after that, I think the grief can be even worse. So not to get lost into that, but for 3 days, I stayed in bed. I was self-employed, so I could do that. So I couldn't get out of bed. And I could just get up to go to the bathroom and maybe get a cup of coffee. That was it. I was just like, it was horrible. I was so depressed and so sorrowful and so filled with despair. And I remember on the 3rd day, I thought I should really eat something. And I got up and I walked by this big mirror in my hallway. And Anne, my hair was so greasy. I hadn't even taken a shower or brushed my teeth in those 3 days. I shudder to think of ever doing that again, but I could not do those basic things. I couldn't. And I looked in the mirror and I go, oh God, you're pathetic. All this loathing and self-hatred was like, I just directed it right into the mirror, and it was horrible. But I think I got a moment of grace at that time too, that said, you're not that horrible. You don't go there. Don't keep going down into the dark. Snap out of it, baby. And I was like, oh, I wasn't even aware that was happening. But shortly after that, I got in the shower and washed my hair and got something to eat. And I continued on with life. But I will never forget, I was in the tomb for 3 days. And I was like Lazarus. And I needed our Lord to raise me up again. And he did. And then if you remember in the story of Lazarus, Jesus did the hard work of raising the dead person, but then he turned to the women, he turned to the people and said, untie him. So he was still bound up. So Jesus opens the door and begins the work of healing in us, but he really calls a lot of the rest of the body of Christ to help us untie our wounds, to untie the tangled thinking that we have and the tangled emotions. So, I got lots of help through support groups and people who love me. And that was an important part of getting through my grief. But we're going to go into that. Now, I know you've never been divorced, but you're a child of a divorced family, and you certainly have gone through horrible grieving periods.
Yeah, I have. Now, I have to admittedly say, I can't say that, at least in my conscious mind, do I remember crying my eyes out or whatever about like my parents' divorce. Because to be quite frank, my parents divorced when I was 7 years old. So I was pretty young.
Right.
But I can say just throughout my life that I have experienced times where, yes, I did have a lot of grieving. Yes, I did have to seek some help, some counseling and things like that. And so even though I can't relate specifically to the story that you told about laying in bed for 3 days, I can say, right, yeah, I can say that there's been times in my life with parenting and even with issues having to do with my kids, and even how it intertwined in my own life and my own psychological health when they were going through hard times, that brought me into my own depression.
Right. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. So I do understand. But related to my parents' divorce, yeah, I mean, I think I had more anger inside just because of dealing with the whole, all the issues that go with being a divorced family, and the communication levels that were so difficult between uh, parents and the expectations and things like that. So yeah, it happens.
It does. So today I want to talk about some of the principles about grief I think that our listeners may already know or may never have heard before, but they're important. So we'll talk about some principles, and then I want to talk about some practices. So
Hmm.
principles and practices. So by the end of our time together, we should have a good understanding and some hope of, if anybody out there is really stuck in the grief process, or it's coming down the pike, or it hits you again, you'll know what to do. So, you ready?
Yes, I am. Thank you
Okay.
so much.
So, the first principle is grief is a natural and normal response to loss. That's what it is. It's a response of the human person to a loss. And we all lose things. So we're all feeling some level of grief, maybe every day. Maybe when you open your refrigerator and you take out the milk and it's sour, it's like, oh, there's a little moment of grief there. And that can't compare to the grief of somebody dying or of divorce, but it's the same thing, and it's very, very normal. So grief is normal. Don't think there's anything wrong with you or psychologically messed up. God wired us that way, and it's a release of our emotions so that we don't keep everything inside.
Well said.
Number two, grief is universal and personal. Just think about it. And when you go on Facebook or something and you say, hey, everybody, could you please pray for my grandmother or my mother who just passed away? My heart is breaking. We enter into that grief with you. It's a universal grief. We can all share and we can all understand at some level. So when you're going through grief, you're not alone. There are other people around you or in the world who do understand to some degree and can enter into that grief with you. You're not alone, even though sometimes it feels like it. Number three, grief is a whole person response. Body, soul, and spirit. Mental, emotional, psychological, spiritual, and physical. My heart was hurting. My intellect was hurting. My body was overwhelmed, exhausted. So in an intense grief, you are going to have intense levels in all areas of your life. And maybe you don't have a tight feeling in your chest. You get up and you've gone to work, but you're still carrying lingering parts of grief in your heart, in your mind. So don't think it's just something that happens in your head or your soul or your heart. We are integrated human persons of all those things together at once, and grief will hit us everywhere. So don't be shocked and don't be grieved because you're grieving. Okay, number four, and I'm sure a lot of people have heard this, grief has 5 traditional stages, and a lot of times they're broken down into 7 stages. But here they are. And remember, people can go through this in a nice, neat order, but some people might not at all. Some people might skip stages or stay stuck in certain stages for longer. But here they are. The very first stage of grief is shock and denial. What? I can't believe this is happening. I never dreamed this was possible. I can't believe it. If you ever hear yourself saying the word, I can't believe it, there's a truth that has hit you really hard that you do not want to look at and you do not want to accept. And being divorced definitely is one of those truths. So shock and denial. And then, you tend to come out of that pretty soon. And then you go to anger. Whoa, that's wrong. That hurt. This isn't right. I didn't want this. I don't want this. And you move into anger. And you mentioned that earlier in your childhood. And that's normal. I think we've done a series on anger, and if we haven't, we should. But anger in itself, again, is a normal response to injustice or perceived injustice. And at the immediate part of anger, it's not sinful. We know that even Jesus got angry, and because that energy is supposed to move us to right a wrong. However, if we feed that anger, linger with that anger, nurse that anger, it becomes the root of bitterness. And scripture talks about how this root defiles us and hurts many. So shock and denial, then anger. And after we've went through our anger and maybe there's nothing we can do and we've blown it all out, then we sink into pain and guilt and regret. I should have done this. I should have done that. And that's where we beat ourselves up. And, interject anytime you want, with understanding.
No, I love everything that you're saying. And I especially like the fact that you said that the steps themselves may mix around, right? Because for everybody, because we're dealing with all kinds of personalities. And I was just thinking about this too, as you were speaking, was that I think what causes the most pain, at least for me, and I think for other people, is that when endings aren't the way that we want them, and that can be for a lot of things, right? It's not just relationships. It could be your job. It could be something to do with maybe your kids or your husband, his life, something to do with his life, or anything else. But a lot when we don't like the way something ended, I know for me, that always bothers me when the ending it wasn't the way that it should be.
You like those nice, neat little endings,
yes,
right?
Yeah, package it up. Right. You feel good about it.
Exactly. And that's a beautiful desire. And it's great when it happens like that, but a lot of times it doesn't.
Mm-hmm.
So then we get sick of beating ourselves up and we go, okay, is there any last thing I can do? Okay, it's inevitable. I've gone through my anger, whatever. Now it's bargaining. Okay, God, I'm going to offer up novenas and rosaries and masses, and help. Is there anything I can do? So you begin to bargain, or you go after your spouse who's walking out the door and go, come back, please come back for the sake of the kids. And you're like, they're walking away and they're dragging you along the concrete. I'm exaggerating, but that's what it feels like. Or even if it's not that desperate, you may go, you know what? I'm going to at least write my spouse a letter. Please give us one more chance. Those are part of bargaining process, and that's filled with a lot of fear. That stage has a lot. There's fear everywhere, but especially in the bargaining, because it's like, I got to do something more. It's going to be all over. And then when it's clear that it's all over, then we go into depression. And depression is not a sin. Depression is healthy. And depression is actually a lowering of all the systems in our mind, heart, spirit, body, soul, so that we can grieve and we can rest and we can get rid of all this stuff. We have to get rid of all this stuff or we will blow. So depression can be very healthy and necessary part of going through and getting over divorce. The sinfulness and the problem is when we're stuck there for a long time. and our hearts and minds aren't open to the moving of the Spirit and the help that comes to us to help move us out of it. So in itself, it's not bad. It's actually good. But there's different forms of depression. And there are people who are what we call high functioning depressives. Maybe they've been slightly depressed all their life, but they get up and they go to work and they get married. And then one day something blows. And all these years and years of depression and some wound that they've been carrying comes to the surface. And this happens in a lot of marriages. It doesn't mean it has to end in divorce. But a lot of people who never see the divorce court are dealing with a lot of difficult things in their marriage. And I think we need to be sensitive to all the people who've never divorced, who are still going through some kind of divorce in their marriage, a pulling apart, a separation, a fear, an anxiety, a grief. We're all looking for happiness and we're all struggling. And that's why I love you and I in this podcast through the St. Raymond Nonnatus Foundation. We want to be help for people who are going through divorce or any kind of family trauma. And we want to be that place for you when you're going through grief.
Rose, thank you. And may I say, since it's kind of still the beginning of the podcast, everything that you said was very enlightening to me too, especially what you said, the idea about the depression, that sometimes, there's different levels of depression. So that was very enlightening. But also for people listening, when she was talking about the St. Raymond Nonnatus Foundation, is that if you have not contacted us to make a free pastoral consultation with a Mercedarian friar, Father Ken Breen, he's probably listening. He is our spiritual moderator, and he's talked to literally at this point hundreds of people who are going through some kind of family crisis. Our tagline is pastoral accompaniment for families in crisis. So that doesn't just account for those affected by divorce and separation, because there's all kinds of crisis, right? Like Rose said, there's some people who are married and they're going to stay married, but yeah, they're in crisis.
Right. And they're deeply grieving.
That's right. So if that's you or someone, I should even say that. We get so many clients and people that'll say, my son, my daughter, my niece. I mean, I've had people contact us about extended family. So whoever it is, you're concerned about either yourself or somebody else, then have them contact us to get that free pastoral consultation by going to nonnatus.org. Thanks, Rose.
Yeah, there's nothing like going to a good Catholic priest who has a big heart like Father Ken does, and all the Mercedarians that I've ever met, and who will sit with you and listen to you and love you and weep with you and mourn with you. We're going to talk about that a little bit later. We're going to look at the life of Christ, but yeah, I love the Mercedarians, and I'm really glad to be part of this group. So, okay. So yes. Shock and denial, anger, pain, guilt, and regret, then bargaining, which has a lot of fear, and then depression. And after the depression, in the release of everything, we begin to have a glimmer of hope and come to acceptance. And then not just accepting it, but realizing that God promises to bring greater good out of every crisis we go through if we will only turn to him and allow him to work in our lives. So that's the hope that we have in any situation.
Thank you.
So here's another principle. We're talking about the principles of grief, and then we're going to talk about some practices. This is important. This is a 3-part principle. We, by our very nature, become attached to things we think will make us happy, safe, secure. Okay. So we are attached to relationships. We are attached to outcomes and nice little neat endings with bows on top. We are attached to this and that, and we hang on to that because it gives us something good. When something or somebody rips that out of our hands, now there's an unnatural detachment. Sometimes we ourselves choose to lay it down and walk away from it. That's also detachment. So loss is always involves some form of first a preliminary attachment and then a detachment. That's what it is. You have it, now you don't have it. Okay. So the deeper the attachment, the greater the loss and pain, the longer and more painful the grief. I'm going to say that again. The deeper the attachment, hanging on, the tighter you're hanging on, the greater the pain of loss, and the longer and more painful the grief process. So if I just met you at a Catholic event and we had lunch together and we were friends, but then I found out, oh, you gossiped about me to the other ladies and you're really not a nice person, and we break up and I never see you again. How, I was attached to you during the conference and I loved it, loved being your friend. Now it's like I never want to see you again. So I've lost your friendship. How sad about it do you think I'm going to be? Not very.
Yeah, you just met the person. Yeah.
So I wasn't that attached to you. If I'm dating somebody for a few months and we never really got intimate in our connection or our mind or hearts or activities, then when we break up, it's not going to kill me. It's when you get really attached, you love the thing or you love the person, and you put a lot of weight onto that relationship or that job or whatever it is. So the deeper the attachment, the greater the pain of loss, the longer and more painful the grief. And Anne, I'll never forget, in running divorce recovery support groups for many decades now, I'll never forget a guy who in our class about the 5th week said, wow, I just see all you women, you're sobbing and you're weeping and you're just all torn up about your divorces. And he goes, I didn't like my divorce at all, but I'm not to the level of grief that you are. And we realized, talking later, this guy had never really bonded with his wife. There was no deep bond or no deep attachment. He cared about her. He said he loved her, but he had his own life and his own thing going on. And he didn't attach very deeply. So when the relationship was over, his grief wasn't as devastating as the women and other men who put their whole heart and soul into the marriage.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And it reminds me too of like, when you think about people in your life, people who are listening, and even you, Rose, too, people who have died, it says it's the same kind of thing. Sometimes somebody dies and, we may cry for a couple years or more. And then sometimes, we might have known them for years, but there was never really an attachment or whatever. So, you might cry for just a bit, but you kind of get over it, if that makes sense.
Right. And it doesn't mean you didn't love those people, but the attachment, the mind, heart, the level and the depth of bonding was deeper. Right. Okay. So we're coming to the end of our principles here. Well, there's a lot more, but for today, you cannot force grief and you can't rush through it. You can't make yourself cry. You can't make yourself get over it. It's time. You've grieved long enough. You need to just snap out of it and get over it. How many times do we hear people say that to people who are grieving? We don't like to be around grieving people. They're dark, they're heavy, they're hard to be around. So we get uncomfortable. So we go, well, isn't it time for you to snap out of it and move on now? We should never say that.
Yeah, I agree with you completely. And if you've ever really gone through any kind of depression or crisis, I have to say, because I think sometimes crisis causes this too, is, empathy is an important aspect. Showing empathy to other people when we've never been in their shoes, obviously, right? And so to understand what somebody's feeling is really a gift when we're able to try to do that.
And some of us can genuinely understand a lot of what somebody's going through, but most of the time, not 100%. So we have to be very careful that we don't step into that role of, okay, I'm the one that's going to tell you when to move on now. We don't know. We don't know.
Mhm.
Okay. And the last one for today, grief, even though you've accepted the crisis, accepted the reality, and you've moved on, it may have been years, that grief can come back at any time through your memory. It can be triggered by smells, by words, by circumstances. When we were doing our Surviving Divorce video series, and I know you have used that before, we took 12 men and women who'd been through divorce and been healed, and we put them in front of a camera and we filmed for several days and said, tell us your story. And then we spliced their stories together to create our video series. Well, these people had been divorced for years. They're fine. Some of them were remarried. They had gotten their annulments. But you put them down in a chair and say, okay, in your mind, go back to that day when your spouse said, I'm out of here. The tears started coming. The sorrow, you could see it overcome their body. Their shoulders would sag. They were over it. They were healed. Except we have this thing that God gave us called memory is hugely powerful, and it's a gift. It allowed that person to go back to that time and feel the grief, feel all that stuff. So don't be surprised years later if you're in a situation and something triggers a memory and you experience or go into that grief from your divorce or whatever the crisis was. You're not going to stay there as long, definitely. But don't be surprised when you're ambushed by grief.
Do you think that, and I do you think that songs bring about that sometimes when you're listening to music and then that song comes on from 1980, 90 or whatever it was, and it's, oh my gosh.
I know, music and smells, all the five senses, touch, and all of our five senses are powerful. And they can project us into the future. They can pull us back to the past. They can bring great sorrow upon us, and they can bring great joy upon us. So that's what we are. We are integrated body and soul, and we can experience all these things in all areas of our life. So yeah, music. Anything else that you want to add before we go on to some practices?
I just want to mention that for people who may be listening who are not directly affected by divorce, but they just saw that this topic was grieving and they think, sounds good. You know, there's some things for them too, because if you've lost a loved one, death of a spouse or death of a loved one or parent or something like that, a lot of these things apply to it, because, you know, sometimes people listen to our podcast that aren't necessarily directly affected by it, but this is a great topic for really anybody.
It is, and that's we started out with the St. Raymond Nonnatus Foundation by moving in quickly to that one area, families affected by the crisis of divorce, because it is so prevalent, and there seems to have been in recent years not the help and not the support that needs to be there. So we rushed into that spot. But by no means are we limited to that. And you're right. We are part of the field hospital, and we have a divorce ward, and we have a depression ward, and we have a lost your job ward, and we have your kids have left the church and won't talk to you ward. You know, all those crises that families do go through, we are here to help because the pain is universal. Mm-hmm. The longings and the dreams and the hopes are universal. We Amen. We're the body of Christ, and we're here for each other. Anyway, I could go off on a tangent.
Yeah.
I'm getting myself back on track now.
Okay.
So we talked about principles of grief. Let's talk about some practices that you can do when you find yourself in a place of grief. And I know, Anne, you and I have talked about this several times. We love to talk about St. Thomas Aquinas's 5 remedies for sorrow. And I'm going to briefly bring them up again because they're so great and easy to remember. And teach your kids and teach the whole family. These are good. So whenever you're in a place of grief and sorrowful, St. Thomas Aquinas says, do these 5 things, and they're in a specific order. Number 1, treat yourself. It doesn't even say pray. This is a doctor of the church and one of the most brilliant minds ever in history. He says, look, you're hurting. You're a kid. You need a sucker. You need a lollipop. You need just treat yourself. Go make yourself calm down and, have a cold beer, go buy a new lipstick, binge watch Downton Abbey for a couple nights, whatever just would give you some pleasure. There's nothing wrong with that to help you feel better. Now, you don't want to stay stuck in that forever. You don't want to, blow your budget doing it, but treat yourself. There's nothing wrong with that. That's what moms and dads do when we fall down and get owies. This is natural. And that's what God does to us as well. He consoles us. Number 2, then weep. Don't stuff your grief. Do not stuff your grief, or it will come out every place in your life in a bad way. Let yourself cry and weep and wail and moan and ache. We have to get it out. And that's what we've been talking about. So treat yourself, weep. And number 3 is share your sorrow with a trusted friend. Now, this is important that we clarify. Don't talk about it ad nauseum with everybody you know. That's not what number 3 is about. Share your sorrow with 1 or 2 trusted, wise friends who will console you and call you to go higher and not go, yeah, he was a miserable SOB and it's a good thing you're rid of him. You don't know. Share your sorrow with somebody who shares your principles. Share your sorrow with somebody who shares your heart.
Yeah.
Number 4,
if I can
yes,
interject there.
Yes.
I think it's a good point that you said to do it with only 1 or 2 people. Here's the reason why, is that you may forget who you told, but unfortunately, when you tell more than a few people, they don't forget. A lot of times they remember what you said. And unfortunately, even though it's a sad thing that people do tend to judge people on mistakes. I'm not saying that means you need to be on eggshells 24/7. Doesn't mean that. But just like Rose said, just stick with a 1 or 2, because people that you can trust that have your values.
And be discerning. And another reason is the more you talk about it, the more you keep yourself stuck at your greatest point of pain. I'm going to say that again because this is important. The more you keep talking about it, the more you stay stuck at your greatest point of pain. So you have to talk about it, but then there has to be a moving on from it. Now, treating yourself and crying and talking with a friend, those are all comforting and releasing. And those are to prepare you for step number 4. And this is here's where the hard work comes in. He sneaks this one in there. Contemplate reality. Clear your calendar, get some quiet, take some time to think about what just happened. When did it start? How did it start? What's my part in it? What's the reality? What's the truth? Where do I go from now? What am I afraid of? These are all the questions and the conversations you need to have with yourself to reach in and allow God to bring you enlightenment and full healing. It's painful. That part, contemplating reality is painful. It's like, I was a horrible wife. I treated my husband like a baby most of our marriage, and he resented me and never told me, and now he's gone. Who wants to contemplate that? But it's necessary to look at truth and receive truth so that you can move on and to be totally healed. So St. Thomas Aquinas has put in these 5 remedies for sorrow, initial consolation and comfort, but then that's to prepare the way for an honest and rigorous taking a look at your life. Finally, when you've done a lot of contemplation and done the hard work of figuring out, what's going on here, You're probably exhausted. And so number 5, he says, take a hot bath and get a good night's sleep.
Love that one.
I know. Rest. Grief is hard work. Grief takes things out of you that you didn't even know you had. So I'll just say them quickly again. Treat yourself, weep, share with a trusted friend, contemplate reality, and get a good night's sleep. Take care of yourself and rest, and repeat as necessary. So those are really good practices. Now, before we move on, I want to invite you to add anything of your own, but I've saved the best for last, so I can't wait to share. But any other thoughts coming to you about grief?
No, I love it so far, Rose. And I think you have so much wisdom because you've dealt with it quite a bit in your life, and God has brought you to a beautiful place that now you're able to minister to other people. So I'm just very happy for you, and happy that we have you as part of this foundation, and also a friend of mine too. So that means so much. Yeah. But I would just say that my own little words of advice may be, and I mean this one, is not to beat yourself up too much either, because sometimes we can blame ourselves for all these things. And like, when you do that contemplation, like Rose said, it comes to you of all the things that you've done. And I should have done this, I could have done that, Let's face it, life's not perfect.
And that's the beautiful thing that we have in the Catholic Church is confession. There's a place to take those things and dump them right down and say, Lord, free me, forgive me, love me, heal me. And he promises to do all that.
Yeah, that's the beauty of it. So if you feel that something in your heart that says, I am beating myself up, and I do need to unload some of this, go on, unload it. But it's going to be probably a regular routine, because all of us need that constantly. It's not a once and done. So if you feel that you've messed up again, it's still bothering you. So by don't beat yourself up, what I mean, I guess, is that I think when you contemplate, you come to that reality that we do live in a broken world, and it is because of sin, not just our sin, but other people's too. And not everything is your fault. Not everything is your fault. That would be something, my own little bit of advice.
No, that's a good thing to memorize. Yep. Not everything is your fault, and you're right about having not once and done. Even this morning, I was like brushing my teeth, and I was like, God, it just seems like I brushed them 5 minutes ago, but that was last night. And it's like, how many times have I brushed my teeth in my life? I mean, it's never over. You have to brush your teeth every day. You have to take a shower every day. You have to wash your face. We think that we've done something and we never have to do it again. But a regular examination of conscience and getting yourself to that special time with our Lord in the sacrament of confession is something that we should do frequently. It keeps us fresh, disease-free, clean, beautiful, and happy. And I'm so glad that I was able to let God draw me back deeper into my own faith years ago, where instead of staying away from the sacraments, I was like, get out of my way. I'm going to confession,
Right. Yeah.
It's great.
Beautiful thing. Thank you.
Okay. So this is the 7 comforts of Jesus. And I love this. So Jesus went through the worst thing that we can ever imagine. And I talk to people all the time that I can't even watch the Passion of the Christ anymore. They will say that to me, that they've grown such a sensitive heart to what our Lord really went through. They can't even watch it. It's so horrible. But even in Jesus' most horrible passion and suffering and injustice, 7 times in 7 ways, he was brought comfort and consolation, even to the moment of his death. So let's take a look what these things that we already know. So Jesus is in the Garden of Olives, right? And I've been there in person. Someday, you guys are going to have a
Holy Land
Land pilgrimage. Yeah. So you're going to go there too. It's awesome. So in the garden, the minute Jesus said, Father, remove this insane reality that's coming down the pike. Please, please, please. But your will be done. The minute he conceded his will to the Father sent an angel to comfort him. The minute Jesus let go of his own agenda and surrendered to the Father flooded him with comfort, even in the sorrow and suffering and the fear. So look for the angels in your life. If you're going through crisis and grief, there's going to be somebody who will appear in your life and you won't maybe not even expect it. And it will happen when you throw up those prayers to our Lord, to the Father, into your hands. Father, your will be done. I don't know how I'm going to get through, but I trust you. So look for the angels and consider how you might be an angel to someone who is going through a horrible time. You don't have to save them or rescue them. Just go sit with them and comfort them.
I love that, Rose. Thank you.
I do too. Then, so now he's whipped and crowned with thorns, and now he's been given this horrible cross, and he's, trudging, through the streets of the old city of Jerusalem, and he's about to be crucified, and the women come alongside him, and they weep for him, and they wail for him. Now, the women can't fix Jesus' problem, but they can they grieved with him. And then he turned around and said, thank you. I appreciate it, but you guys better start grieving for your own selves and your kids, because sin is going to take you all down. So couldn't fix Jesus' problem. They could be with him in it. And they offered some level of comfort. He was not alone. He wasn't just surrounded by jeering people who hated him. There were people there who could come alongside him in his grief. So look for the people who recognize that you're suffering and can be with you in the suffering. Then he experienced Veronica. Now we know Veronica is the woman who moved in past the crowds and got really close to Jesus. So close, she could wipe his face. Our face is a very personal part of us. It's where I always say it's where we live. You see others in their face, their eyes, their expression. She was able to move into a very tender and vulnerable and personal part of Jesus' life and wipe his face. There are people in your life who can move in to those tender, personal places. Those are the ones you share your sorrow with, this trusted friend. They know the real details. Not everybody does. Let those people come in and wipe your face, wipe the blood from your face. And again, consider how you might be a Veronica to somebody. Again, you can't fix the problem. You can't save them, but you can move in and wipe their tears.
Beautifully stated. And I love what you said about the face, because it really is where our emotions, our soul are there.
The eyes are the window of the soul, right? Okay, so then after Veronica came Simon. Now, Simon was a total stranger. And guess what? Simon didn't even really want to carry the cross. He was, quote unquote, conscripted by the Roman soldiers. He was jerked out of the crowd, go here, do this. There may be people in your life, you're going through crisis and sorrow right now, and they're total strangers, but they're going to come into your life and help with the heavy lifting for a while. See, Simon took the cross off Jesus for a little while. He didn't take it away. And a lot of times we have to go through our crises because it's our cross, and that's how we're going to be redeemed. We have to carry our own cross, but some people can help with the heavy lifting for a while. I remember when I was going through divorce and I had to move, and I'm all alone. I'm feeling a lot of self-pity, and I have all this heavy furniture. I can't lift it. I can't pack it. Have you ever tried to pack as a single person, all your stuff and move to a new place. It's daunting, overwhelming. It's horrible. But these two young college guys were part of this moving, and they were sweet and they were kind, and they said, here, let me do this for you. Oh, we'll throw this extra in for you. We'll do the heavy lifting for you. My spirits were so lifted by just somebody stronger saying, just sit down, have a Diet Coke. We're going to do the work for a while. That was a huge blessing to me. So consider, if you see somebody who's going through crisis, you can't take their problem away. You're not supposed to take their problem away, but see how you can do some heavy lifting, something that's difficult for you. It was difficult for Simon to carry that cross, but he did it, and he's down in history forever. We will never forget Veronica of the soft, tender touch, or Simon of the strong, heavy lifting help for Jesus. And we have those people in our life too.
That's
then
right.
Jesus is hanging on the cross. And I don't mean to sound casual about that at all, but he actually gets some comfort from this intimate connection with the good thief. So now the good thief is turning to Jesus and saying, you are who you are. Please remember me. And I was bad. I was wrong. Please have mercy on me. And, Jesus, there was a connection there. Jesus felt some comfort, I'm sure, because here's somebody who was not just didn't sit on the sidelines and go, I feel your pain. Hello. He was being crucified too. He was feeling Jesus' pain in a way that nobody else could. He was hanging on the cross while Jesus was hanging on the cross. I always think these are the people in your divorce support groups. They are also on the cross of divorce. They know in a more personal and more detailed way what you're going through, and they can comfort you. So be a comfort to others. If you're going through a divorce, or after your divorce, if God makes a way for you to get into some kind of divorce healing ministry, do it. Be a good thief. Allow yourself to be crucified with others who are hurting. Then the last two comforts are two people who was standing at the foot of the cross with Jesus. Well, there was more than two, but it was Mary and John. So John represents our best friends, our closest, most intimate, loved friends. Don't push your friends away when you're in grief. Let them come stand at the foot of your cross. And Mary, I've saved the best for last. She is our mother. She weeps for us as she wept for Jesus. She longs for our redemption and our freedom and our rising again. She is filled with love for us, her children. And if you don't have a devotion to our Blessed Mother, ask for one and seek it out, because she can bring great comfort and solace. Again, she won't take away your problem, but she will be at the foot of your own cross, and she will be there at your resurrection, and she will be filled with lots of love and consolation for you. This stuff is real. The saints are real. They're more alive than they were when they were on earth.
So beautiful. And for anyone listening and thinking they want that relationship with Our Lady, but they just don't know how to get there, may I suggest simply to pray the rosary. If you haven't done it before, just take the time, take 15 minutes a day and pray the rosary and meditate on the life of Christ and the gospel. And you will soon find that you've developed a relationship with her too.
Yeah, I love her. And I'm so thankful that our teachers, when we were little, taught us to love her. She's been a great consolation to me and a help. Our Lady, pray for us. So there we have it. We've talked about some principles about grief. It's normal. It's natural. It's necessary for healing. It will come back and bite you every once in a while, but don't be afraid of that. The more attached you are to something that you lose, the longer and deeper the grief will be. But we have our hope in those consolations that God has for us in his word, in his people, in his church, in his sacraments. There are ways to get through it and to be consoled and to be comforted and renewed and refreshed. So hopefully Anne and I and all of us at the St. Raymond Nonnatus Foundation can be part of your healing and consolation, no matter what your family crisis. We love you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Rose, because, we're a family. We really are. And I think that's what sets this foundation apart. Not to say that other nonprofits aren't families too, right? But I think the whole charism, now, for those who don't know much about the Mercedarian order, is that the fourth charism is that willingness to give our lives for those in danger of losing their faith.
And I love that. That's exactly what Jesus did. He gave his life so that we wouldn't lose our faith in the Father. The Jews were struggling, the people all over the earth, all of us are still struggling. And it's real tempting when we're carrying these crosses and bearing these burdens to lose our faith in God and his infinite mercy and love for us. He loves us. He will not leave us or forsake us. And that is a great consolation.
Yeah, thank you, Rose. And you know what? When you think about the comparisons that we do in our minds about what is the definition of a good Catholic, I mean, certainly it is a person who loves God with all their heart, soul, mind, and spirit, and who knows their faith, right? But part of that also is a person who does have a big heart for others. And when you've been hurt, when you have suffered, your heart is also growing too. So as much as it sounds like a curse or like not so much a good thing, but believe it or not, when you've suffered a lot, I have found, and I think you have too, Rose, that people who've really suffered a lot, they wind up being people who understand humans and human suffering and the human condition more than people where everything in their life has gone pretty well, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, you're reminding me of the Grinch and how he had this tiny little heart. And we know that people with tiny little tight black hearts are usually grieving. They're stuck in grief.
Yeah.
They've been hurt. They're angry. They're lost. And when they relax and open up and let God's grace come in and go through the grief process to acceptance and hope, their hearts get 10 times bigger. So yeah, here's beautiful. To big hearts. Here's to big, big, big hearts.
And remember that life isn't, in worldly terms, life ends when somebody dies, right? But to be quite honest, and we've heard this in a lot of Christian circles and perhaps Catholic circles too, that eternity, right? It's just beginning right now. This is just the beginning, right? This is just the beginning of your relationship with God. And
the best is yet to come.
The best is yet to come.
Yeah. Yes. Well, Anne, thank you so much for another beautiful time together with you to bring God's hope and God's healing to as many people as we can. So thanks so much. And to all the Mercedarians.
Oh, yes. Thank you. And may I also say at the end of this podcast, there's 2 opportunities here for you. Number 1, get to know Rose at rosesweet.com. Make your appointment to discuss with her coaching that she does, all kinds of coaching. So you go to rosesweet.com and you can make that appointment with Rose. And then you can get that pastoral consultation appointment with us. And as I said, that's free at nonnatus.org. So thank you all for joining us, and come back again next month. We're always at the first Tuesday of every month at 8 p.m. Eastern, but we're always on demand too. So you don't have to listen when it premieres, but we're here for you. God bless everyone. We'll see you next month.
Thank you for listening to this podcast. For more information about the St. Raymond Nonnatus Foundation, visit nonnatus.org or email director.srnf@gmail.com. Over 2,000 years ago, 2 disillusioned disciples, walked along a dusty road to Emmaus. They had just witnessed Jesus, their friend and leader, whom they hoped to be the Messiah, suffer a gruesome death by crucifixion. Doubt, fear, and uncertainty clouded their conversation as they journeyed home, questioning the future. Until something miraculous happened. The risen Jesus appeared and answered their questions. Today, many young Catholics step onto college campuses with numerous questions about their faith, yearning to know if the seed of faith given to them as a child is both true and practical. Using the miracle on the road to Emmaus as a model, young adult ministers conversed weekly for 3 months with college students about the most pressing questions they had about the Catholic faith. As they journeyed together virtually, something amazing happened. Doubts disappeared, fears faded, and Jesus revealed that He is still alive. Hearts Burning Within Us, the latest book from Patchwork Heart Ministry, scheduled to be released in the summer of 2021, is a result of that grace-infused conversation. To pre-order your copy and help spread the word about the book, visit patchworkheart.org.